This month's theme is partnership with the intimate. It's not, it is only natural that we think of intimate or intimacy as sexual. After all, isn't that what the networks, the movies, the TV, YouTube, and society have taught us? We see that constantly. However, it means so much more. The word intimate has been around since 1538 and comes from a Latin word that I won't even try to pronounce. The original meaning included deep-seated, most inward, make known, impress, very familiar, and to name just a few. Today's definition includes private, personal, closely acquainted, and familiar. The Urban American Dictionary defines intimate as two people are within each other's minds, without boundaries, or involved in sex and something personal. I believe that intimacy is what we call the experience of really knowing and being known by another person. An intimate friend is someone we feel very close to. They know us at a very deep level. If something happens that damages that intimacy between those two people, we begin to feel distant from each other. Or a person who really doesn't know us at all has a superficial relationship with us. This month's book, Intimacy with God, by Thomas Keating, was an American Catholic who was an American Catholic monk and priest and was instrumental and the principal developer of centering prayer, which is a contemporary method of contemplative prayer. Now, a prolific writer, you will find many of his books and very, very educational and informative. I have to admit that I got hooked by the first chapter of his book that we are to be reading this month, entitled Making Friends with God. According to Keating, the spiritual path is based on a deepening trust of God. Why? Because trust allows us to take the initial leap to encounter God at a deeper level within ourselves. I have worked with a spiritual mentor for 14 years. She calls moving to a deeper level like taking an elevator down into a coal mine or into a mine of any kind. It's dark. It's down there. You have to turn the lights on to be able to see down there. And we're moving into places within ourselves that have not seen the light of day for years. It's the places that we have to go to heal and unfold in a greater relationship with God. Trust is the heart of intimacy. We move into trust with somebody, and the closer we let them get to us. The degree to which trust is compromised in a relationship is the degree to which intimacy evaporates. Our deepening spiritual journey may be blocked if we carry negative attitudes and beliefs, however, about God. Usually those attitudes and beliefs were created when we were just children and we were receiving our original religious training. We may have thought that God was this angry father sitting in the sky, or a harsh judge for everything we did, or someone that predestined our lives. I can remember thinking as a child that God had this book and he had our name on it, and he wrote down everything that was going to happen in our life from the time we were born until the time we died. This was our life story. This is certainly not what I believe today. Or how many times have you heard somebody say it was God's will that someone have cancer, that they had a heart attack or an accident and died? Certainly that does not leave room for free will that God created within us. Perverse religious attitudes and beliefs represent distorted spiritual values. This is true of most spiritualities and religions. If we still have those kinds of beliefs, it's hard to develop a desire to begin a spiritual journey, because sometimes fear or the unknown takes over. In Matthew 23, Jesus is talking to the disciples and those that have followed him, and he's specifically talking about the Pharisees and the scribes. And in verse 26, he's discussing what is right and what is wrong and how these groups of people can hurt others. In verse 26, he states of Matthew 23, he states, "Clean first the inside of the cup and of the plate, so that the outside may also be clean." What he's saying is that we must work on what lies within ourselves so that people around us see and know we are positive and loving to others, both internally and externally. And internally are the beliefs and the feelings that we've had throughout our whole entire life. Scripture tells us that our interior motive is far more important than our exterior acts. And returning to my original statement about relationships with God being built on trust, as we make the effort to deepen our relationship with God, our relationships with ourselves and others and God deepen and grow. People have all kinds of misconceptions about intimacy with God. The first misconception is intimacy is about sex. First, in a world that regularly defines intimacy as something sexual, it is difficult to compartmentalize that it is possible to have intimacy with the divine that does not include sex. God is the spirit that is one with each of us, and to think otherwise is to live in duality. Misconception number 2, intimacy should be easy. Intimacy with God does take a lot of effort. Many people don't want to take that time or make that effort that it requires to get to know God at a greater degree. Some fear that creating that relationship with God will demand us to be involved and give all of our attention every day to God. This is usually caused by a fear that their day-to-day life is all consumed by God. They believe pursuing a spiritual journey will compromise their autonomy. Misconception number 3 shouldn't involve waiting. We've been groomed by the media to expect quick results with very little effort. We send a message via text, and within a matter of moments, we get it back or we get a response. Trust me, sometimes our answers take days, take weeks, take months after we've sent our message out, for us to conceptualize, to understand, and to hear the divine. Misconception number 4 is intimacy with God is only for special people. Many people assume that being intimate with God is a special calling. They think that the average person can't do it. It has to be a minister or a monk or a priest or someone, a mystic or someone that's devoted all the time. Absolutely not true. Anyone can choose an intimate spiritual journey with God. Misconception number 5 is it's too hard to figure out how to become intimate with God. Well, let me tell you, you got to create your own Uber to get there. But opportunities abound. Our center offers classes. It has a lending library. It has a bookstore. There are plenty of ministers and practitioners who are more than willing to help and guide you and pray with you. If you truly choose to be intimate in a relationship with God, there is always a way. and an abundance of assistance is available to you. All you have to do is ask. Helping us stay connected has become big business in our culture, not just here in America, but in the world. Smartphones, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter give us instant access to friends and family, work, the world, current events. But how much time do we actually spend building meaningful face-to-face relationships? Of course, that has become more difficult or a bit of a challenge because of COVID. However, we can still reach out via the phone, via Zoom, via FaceTime. And let's go one step further. How much effort have we extended to invest in our connection with God? So how do we just develop this intimacy with the Creator? What is it that calls us to make a commitment to go deeper within? First, we have to have a yearning to know God in a greater and more personal way. In the Science of Mind text, Ernest Holmes tells us, "They who hunger and thirst after righteousness shall be filled." Is there anyone who does not have a soul hunger? Does not the spirit of man thirst after knowledge and understanding, yearn for truth and reality as blind men yearn for light? And his hunger can only be satisfied with spiritual food as manna from heaven. If you have no desire to know God at a greater depth, then the assumption is you do not yearn for that more intimate relationship with God. Next, we must be willing to be vulnerable. I'll be the first person to say this is a tough one. Nobody, absolutely nobody, likes to be vulnerable. Our natural instinct is to protect ourselves at all cost. Brown, America's psychologist, tells us embracing our vulnerability is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of light. There's that word darkness again. We have to be willing to look at the hidden deep within that is preventing us from creating an intimate relationship with God. That takes courage and a willingness to lay down what we are afraid of the most. Often, this is what lays hidden within our subconscious. Next, we must be open. Ernest Holmes tells us that Christ stands at the door and knocks. We, however, must be open to receive when the morsels of spirit, the morsel of spirituality, all of that is knocking, wanting to come in within. We, however, have to be open if we're to receive. A spiritual journey of intimacy is about receiving divine direction and input. It is all about a willingness to be still and listen. Dr. Holmes once again states, we are still perfect beings within, and the within may become the without if we will carefully train ourselves to listen to the inner voice of truth, which speaks to us in our moments of quietness and solitude. The within may become the without. Remember the verse about cleaning the inside of the cup so that the outside shines. It's the inside that must be still to hear the voice of God. And the only way we can do this is to settle ourselves within. Once we have listened and heard the words of truth, we tend to become more honest with ourselves and others. Mother Teresa once stated, honesty and transparency make you vulnerable. Be honest and transparent anyway. At my father's memorial service, as well as his 100th birthday party, numerous people stepped forward to share stories about what an honest man he was. He was not only honest with others, but he was honest with himself. He was willing to admit his mistakes and move on. I loved it, especially when he laughed at himself. I'll never forget one day I walked into his room and there was something on the television about Ted Kennedy. And my dad sat there with an angry look on his face and he goes, "I will never, ever forgive Ted Kennedy for killing that girl at Chippequatic." And I looked at him and I said, "Who died, God? Who died and made you God, Dad?" And he just looked at me and got a big smile on his face and chuckled. And he said, "Yep, you're right." We all knew, however, that the number one priority in my dad's life was God. He had done this inner work for many years. Finally, we come to understand and know that on this intimate journey, we develop a greater wisdom. Reverend Charles Fillmore, a unity minister, indicates in the Revealing World, wisdom and divine understanding are attributes that come from the Spirit of Christ within us. The price that we must pay for consciousness attainment of divine wisdom is an understanding in that we let it go of the personal self with its limited beliefs. Wisdom is such a gift. It includes intuitive knowing, the voice of God within, understanding and discrimination. It's so much more than book learning and knowledge. It's the inner knowingness that you are one with God. There is no separation between you and spirit. If there was, that would be duality. You're probably wondering why I have quoted so many spiritual scholars this morning. The answer is very simple. I wanted you to know the importance that the spiritual teachers that we have had from years past have placed on these qualities, that the importance of these qualities of yearning, vulnerability, openness, stillness and listening, honesty and wisdom on our spiritual journey of intimacy. They believed the truth of these things. They believed they were important. And so they shared them and wrote about them. So just how do you get to that place of yearning? How do you commit to a spiritual journey that will take you to a deeper place of healing and knowing? It means committing to an intimate time every day to spend in study as well as treatment. First, you got to make a commitment to have quiet time every day. Determine the value of your intimacy with God will help you make that decision, and it will help you in life. View it equally as important as food for your body or the oxygen you breathe is that time you spend with the divine. Prioritize your schedule. Go ahead and put it on your calendar, but start off slowly. If you're not used to a spiritual practice or a spiritual journey, begin in short increments, like 10 minutes a day. As you become more comfortable with the time, increase it. Choose a special place to do your work. Maybe it's the garden, a chair in your garden, or maybe it's a special chair in your living room, or maybe it's a Buddha pillow that you sit on. Place things that are important to you in that sacred area. Maybe it's a candle, or maybe it's a special picture, or Buddha beads, or a stone. Whatever it is, make that space sacred and important to you, so you want to return there. Select a spiritual book to read. It might be the Science of Mind text or another one of Holmes' great writings. It could be the Course in Miracles, the Bible, or another spiritual book that you really want to delve into because of the topic. Use a journal to write down your thoughts and your insights that you have when you're praying, when you're listening, when you're reading. It doesn't have to be lengthy and complicated. It might be a simple quote. It might be gratitude for something that you began to understand, or of new knowledge that came to you, that nudged you forward on this journey. Don't forget to meditate. I'm not a great meditator, so when I started with just 5 minutes. 5 minutes to meditate. It doesn't have to be forever or a long, lengthy time. And then be sure to treat and move your feet. Remember, this is your time to have a conversation with God in your very own words. If you haven't learned the 5 steps of treatment yet, be sure to keep it positive. Know and embrace that it is already done in mind, in love, and law. Don't forget to be patient with yourself. Change comes slowly. And be sure to spend time with others who support your beliefs and your journey. You could join a discussion group, take a class, join a reading group, join the Power of 8, or attend a workshop. When I was in college, I took a couple of semesters of ceramics. I soon learned the process of breaking up the air bubbles in the clay. We grab a lump of clay and we cross it across a piano wire and slap it down, and that hopefully began to break the bubbles within the air bubbles within the clay. And then there was the process of actually learning how to center the lump of clay on the wheel. And it was a challenging process as we learned how to shape that lump of clay into something as we whipped the bottom wheel with our leg, and that had to be fast. It was my task, however, to determine what I was making: a cup, a vase, a pitcher. There were a multitude of projects that we had to complete for our grade in the class. Now, before it could be placed in the kiln for firing, we had to trim our creation. If the instrument in our hand was not the best one to use, or our hand was not stable but steady but shaky, we could destroy the cup or the glass or the bowl that we had made. This made life a little bit more difficult. Then came the initial drying process, where the project left to air dry for several days. This is part of the patience in creating something new. Then the item was placed in the kiln, in the fire, at a very low temperature. And this was done slowly so it wouldn't burst from the cold to the hot. And next, the kiln was increased to 350 to 500 to 900, sometimes over 1200 degrees. And this was done to evaporate the water that was left within the clay. There are a few more steps in the firing process. Then sometimes the cup or the bowl might shrink a little bit during the next stage, which is called the vitrification process. That is when the clay is hardened and becomes tighter, because the air and the moisture has been excluded from the clay. And this happens too because of the melting of the various components in the clay because of the fire. Ultimately, the clay is strengthened through this process of firing. And while the clay cup or pot is an object, it goes through a similar process that we do with our spiritual journey of intimacy with the divine. We are shaped and molded. We go through many stages to learn, to heal, and to grow. It's a long process. It's a continuing process. But ultimately, we are transformed by our trust and our faith in the divine. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours. And so it is.